Hi guys, if you follow me on social media, you may have noticed that I've developed my own slave cylinders lately, and frankly this is something that you should have seen it coming. If you're an older subscriber of this channel, you may have seen that I've made many videos in the past discussing about the maintenance of marine brakes. So, if you're using the classic slave cylinders, I have some videos that can help you get the most out of this braking system. However, after riding with the classic slave cylinders for as long as I ride my competition trials bike and facing all of the issues I've discussed in the past through my videos, I decided to get a little deeper into this topic and design my own take on the hydraulic rim brakes for trial bikes, and I have to admit that it was the best decision I could make. But let's get everything from the beginning and summarize the key issues I had with my old slave cylinders that actually were not initially designed with bike trials in mind. The first thing I didn't like about the classic slave cylinders was that they were designed with two different threads at their connecting ports. More specifically, the classic slave cylinders feature one M6 and one M8 threaded port. The problem with that was that once you decide to use these commonly used slave cylinders, you only have the option to use a barbed fitting for the M6 threaded port. However, I really don't like barbed fittings as they stress the hoses and they can cause a possible weak area on the hose that is prone to fail if it gets hit by your heel or during a fall. In order to avoid this issue, I designed the X-cycling barbed to olive fitting adapter, which almost eliminated the probability of broken hoses, and in fact I had never broken a hose again for as long as I was using this adapter. If you want to get one of these adapters, you can get it directly via our eshop over at bikecave.eu, and by doing so you are also helping this channel and motivate me to go on with my quest to develop more bike products and tools. Another major issue that I had, and it took me quite a while to solve and optimize, was that these slave cylinders can be quite tricky to maintain. More specifically, I had noticed that the more you ride, the more the pistons are getting less responsive, and this could result to sticky pistons. As we've already discussed in a previous video, when you engage your brakes and the pistons move in and out of the slave cylinder's body, they tend to get contaminated with dust and dirt from the environment, and these contaminate both the brake fluid and the seals. In order to solve this problem, I developed a maintenance protocol that actively cleans the pistons and washes out the contaminated brake fluid in order to maintain as much as possible the responsiveness while braking. If you haven't watched the relevant video in which I share with you my maintenance routine for the classic slave cylinders, you can check it out by following the relevant link in the description below. However, despite the fact that I had almost solved most of the issues that I was facing while using the classic slave cylinders, there was one issue that is intrinsic to their design and could not be solved. So the one thing that really bothers me is that the classic slave cylinders that almost all of us use are not repairable, which means that you cannot take them apart to maintain them or replace their parts such as their contaminated seals, for example. This means that once they start to fail and no maintenance protocol can make them work properly, you have to ditch them and get a new pair of slave cylinders. I know that the design characteristics as non-repairable parts may make them a bit cheaper to manufacture, as less and simpler parts are needed for their assembly, and also the absence of non-permanent connections allow for easier automatic assembly, but the fact that they are non-repairable made me take a step closer to my decision to design and manufacture the X-cycling slave cylinders. So long story short, as the idea of the perfect slave cylinder was developing in my mind all these years that I had to work with the classic ones, I finally decided to take a step forward and actually design and manufacture my take on the best ever trials-oriented slave cylinders for hydraulic rim brakes. Thus, now that I use the X-cycling slave cylinders for the past months, I can proudly say that I have the best lever response and feel I've ever had before. But let's dive into the details of the design and you'll see for yourself how I managed to get to that point. So for the main part of today's video, we are going to discuss on the full specifications of these trial-specific slave cylinders, and to begin with, let's discuss on the main design characteristics of the X-cycling slave cylinders, which is their repairability. These slave cylinders have been designed from the ground up in order to be fully repairable while maintaining their compatibility with the components that are already commercially available for the classic slave cylinders that almost every trial rider uses up to now. Designed for repairability and ease of maintenance were the main objectives of this project, as almost all the commercially available slave cylinders up to now have been manufactured in such a way that they cannot be taken apart. As an engineer, I'm not really an advocate of non-repairable products as they are destined to fail at some point, and thus their life cycle is limited and cannot be extended significantly, as when you start using them, they will never be as good as new again. Also, the fact that they are combining a variety of materials without being able to be taken apart means that they are more difficult to be recycled once their service life is over. So once I decided to develop my take on a trial-specific hydraulic rim brake system, repairability was one of my basic design specifications. Obviously, repairability implies that you can take your slave cylinders apart to fully clean all the components, replace their seals with new ones if needed, and of course, regrease everything. This will ensure that everything works perfectly and you can take the most out of your brakes. Moreover, it has to be underlined that the decision to go that way and design slave cylinders that can be easily taken apart revealed another opportunity for further development of the system, and I bet you are going to like this one. So additional to the fact that you can disassemble the C-cycling slave cylinders, clean them and rebuild them with brand new grease and seals in order to get that brand new brake feel, you can now customize some of the parts inside the slave cylinders in order to optimize the performance and the response of your rim brakes. More specifically, you can tune the C-cycling slave cylinders for weight and performance by selecting between two different springs, two different piston materials and two different materials for the rest of their internal parts. So you can get the C-cycling slave cylinders to be as light as possible by going with the polymer pistons and the titanium internal hardware, or you can fine-tune your brake lever feel and response by selecting between the different springs or between the polymer and the aluminum slave cylinder pistons. I know that all these different options for customization are a bit confusing right now, but I'm going to go through the full product range in my next video, and I'm going to explain how every selection affects the overall performance and braking response of the C-cycling slave cylinders. The next feature that should be discussed a bit more analytically is that these slave cylinders have been designed to be compatible with almost every accessory that already exists for the classic slave cylinders, which means that you can use the same hoses and fittings, but they are not compatible with the M6 barbed fittings, as the C-cycling slave cylinders feature two M8 threaded holes for the connection of the hydraulic hoses. Also, they are directly compatible with all common brake lamps and brake boosters. Another important design specification that was taken into account during the development of the slave cylinders was their weight. The C-cycling slave cylinders have been designed to be as light as possible regardless of the complexity of their internal design. This was made possible by careful design and of course by using the best materials I could go for in order to be able to remove extra material from areas that do not need it while maintaining their structural integrity. This resulted in the lightest slave cylinders possible, even when they are configured using the aluminum pistons and stainless steel internal components and fittings. The next important but hidden feature is that they have been designed with ease of maintenance and thus ease of bleeding in mind. This means that their internal structure has been designed to allow for rapid air removal, as it does not allow for air to get trapped inside them. Also, their design allows for rapid brake fluid flow inside the slave cylinders in order to allow higher speeds during the piston movements and especially when the piston retracts. All these specifications sum up the basic C-cycling ideology of zero compromise design and manufacture, and I'm so happy to share them with you after an extensive period of testing and fine-tuning of their design. Unfortunately, they are not available yet as they are still in the production phase, but keep in mind that they will be produced in very small batches as they may be CNC machined, but still every part has to be carefully inspected and verified, and finally, every single slave cylinder is hand finished and assembled by me. Thus, if you're already interested in getting a set or two of them, and you want to be one of the first ones who gets the upcoming C-cycling slave cylinders, you can follow our social media accounts and you get notified of the release date via relevant stories and posts. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could share your thoughts on this project in the comment section below, and I'd love to discuss with you anything regarding this new concept of trial-specific slave cylinders. So that's it for today's video, and next time I'll try to present the options you can have in order to configure the C-cycling slave cylinders to your liking, and also I'll share with you their typical maintenance procedure. Thank you so much for subscribing and watching, and until next time, have fun riding your bikes and make sure that your brakes are as snappy as possible.